Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today something hugely significant happened. An event I've been waiting for these past months. So, for the first time since this war began, the Russian Federation has been compelled to reduce oil output and shut active wells because of strikes carried out by Ukrainian drones. To my mind, this could mark a real turning point. Ukraine has shown it can take away Russia's primary revenue stream, the money that pays for the war. Put simply, Ukraine's potential victory has moved from an abstract possibility to something practical. Ukraine now wields a concrete, operational instrument capable of severely disrupting, perhaps even largely stopping, Russian oil production, transport, refining, and exports. Deprived of that income, Moscow would lose the funds to sustain the conflict. And when the money disappears, the regime that lives off those funds will collapse. Putin has long depended on material incentives to mobilize support. The war, for many, has always been about money. So what exactly happened today? Reuters, citing 3 different sources inside Russia's oil sector, reported that Russia, which supplies roughly 9% of the world's oil, may have to reduce output after Ukrainian drone attacks on critical oil infrastructure. One source said this became a real possibility after strikes hit Baltic ports like Ust-Luga and Primorsk, and several major refineries, including Kirishi, the refinery linked to Putin personally, Ryazan, Saratov, and many others. 2 other Reuters sources added that Transneft, the state company that runs pipelines and oil terminals, has stopped taking oil from producers into its system for storage. In other words, Transneft's terminals and pipelines are full. There's no additional capacity. I've repeatedly said that when refineries are knocked out, oil accumulates with nowhere to go, and attacks on pipelines and ports prevent export. The result is growing oversupply inside Russia. Produced oil literally cannot be shipped out. When this bottleneck becomes critical, companies will be forced to cap wells and shut fields. Restarting them later is extremely difficult and expensive. That's how oil production works. And now that stage has arrived. Reuters reports Transneft warned it might limit crude intake if attacks persist. Plainly put, oil producers, prepare to seal your wells. There's nowhere to send your oil. Exports are being constrained. Without exports, there's no export income. No export income means no cash for the kleptocratic system that depends. To be clear, flows haven't stopped completely yet, but the damage is real and measurable. Russia itself admits output cuts are happening because of drone strikes. Production is falling due to Ukrainian operators. These strikes are growing more effective. Just last week, a Ukrainian attack damaged Primorsk, a major oil loading port on the Gulf of Finland. Its capacity is about 1 million barrels per day, over 10% of Russia's output. At least half the berths there are now non-functional after the strikes. Ust-Luga, another Gulf of Finland port, still hasn't recovered after an August strike on the BPS-2 pipeline feeding it. Reuters sources say Ust-Luga is operating at roughly half capacity this September. This has created a large queue of empty tankers in the Gulf of Finland. They were chartered to load at Primorsk and Ust-Luga, but can't because the ports can't receive oil. Some tankers are reportedly rerouting to other ports to avoid idle time and lost earnings. If tankers leave, large volumes of Russian oil simply won't reach global markets. Real-time exports are already falling, forcing producers to cut output. I'll stress this again. Wells cannot be reopened quickly. Russia is losing production volumes that will remain offline, if not permanently, then for a very long time, until sanctions are lifted, and Western specialists and technologies return to unseal fields and restart production. In short, Ukrainian drone strikes have created a strategic-level crisis for Russia. This is a major step toward a financial catastrophe. Even if strikes stopped tomorrow and sanctions were lifted immediately, restoring output and export capacity would take months or years. And Ukraine shows no sign of stopping its strikes on refineries and transport logistics. Just last night, a Rosneft refinery in Saratov was struck. Local residents greeted the drones with celebratory gunfire and searchlights, and explosions and fires lit the refinery grounds. By morning, the plant had suspended operations. This proves Ukraine won't stop. Russian refining and export capacity is shrinking, not growing. The consequence: oil production, refining and exports will decline further. And revenues for Russian companies and the state budget will fall sharply. They already have fallen, but continued attacks could push the system toward collapse. The Russian Academy of Sciences estimates consolidated budget revenues will total 61 trillion rubles this year, about 300 billion less than last year's 61.3 trillion. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly a 10% decline in budget receipts. The Academy also reports that economic growth has stopped. Zero growth as of the latest data. I believe the real picture is worse. Those Academy calculations were made before late August and early September strikes that damaged half of European Russia's refineries and knocked out many oil loading ports. So the actual situation is likely grimmer than official forecasts suggest. Things are turning very bad for Putin. For about 3 years, the regime's politico-economic model functioned. Refineries operated, reserves were available, oil flowed westward, and money funded the war. But once reserves shrink, refineries burn, and ports stop taking tankers, that model collapses. Russia faces effective bankruptcy. Sure, it can squeeze citizens through bank borrowing, higher taxes, or money printing to buy time, but that doesn't change the core problem. The country has lost sources of liquid revenue. The war is consuming more than the economy produces, and oil earnings are falling because of Ukrainian action. No economy can function long without income. Bankruptcy and default become inevitable. I believe Putin has begun to understand this. He looks genuinely alarmed. A cut in oil production and exports under current conditions threatens the collapse of Russia's economy, and economic collapse leads to political crisis. In an authoritarian state, that can mean a palace coup or a military takeover, not elections. If those around him decide to replace him, they may execute him immediately. No trial. Putin is understandably terrified for his personal safety. So he is scrambling to stabilize the economy, to restore at least some profitability, so the system can continue. Just yesterday, he convened the government's economic bloc for the second time this month and reprimanded them. He was visibly agitated, demanding answers for the sharp slowdown. I'll quote an unusually heated passage from him. Last year, we discussed measures to fight inflation and strengthen macroeconomic stability, and agreed that would inevitably cool the economy. We called it a soft landing. We must walk a sharp blade to avoid undermining policy. What do we see now? According to the Ministry of Economic Development, in July, GDP grew just 0.4% year on year. And for the first 7 months, GDP growth was only 1.1%. Is that enough? Are we achieving our goals? Or do we need other measures and higher growth rates? That speech reveals anger, dissatisfaction, and fear. Putin usually proclaims the economy is fine, but when he publicly scolds his ministers, it signals a deep worry behind closed doors. He fears a return of the 1990s. Poverty, default, runaway inflation, unpaid wages and pensions. He doesn't fear that for the people. He fears it for himself. He remembers those years and has devoted his life to avoiding them. The loss of money and power is an existential threat to his personal security. And he knows it. The immediate mortal danger to him isn't Ukrainian tanks or NATO jets. It's those dull numbers in central bank and ministry reports. And he's right to be worried. I've said before that the Putin system will be undone by economic catastrophe. My bet was on hyperinflation, though other scenarios could unfold. Putin seems to sense the economy is the Achilles heel, the critical weak point of his regime. One crucial point. Until now, talk of an economic collapse in Russia was mostly a distant prediction tied to sanctions slowly taking effect. But thanks to Ukrainian drones compelling Russia to close wells and reduce exports, the dynamic has changed. The timing of collapse can be actively influenced. The more Ukrainian strikes hit the oil industry, the faster Russia's economy will decay. The trajectory is now linked directly to Ukraine's unmanned systems. Drone operations have become a decisive lever. Use them more and Russia loses funds faster, hastening defeat.